Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Dish. It is that time of the month where we have people from, or a person, I should say, from the Seattle area. It's time to talk Windows because Windows is probably, I would say, arguably one of the most exciting things happening in the world of Microsoft right now. We're getting ready for Windows 11. It is sort of unveiled Windows 365. There's a lot going on. How's it going, Aaron?
It's going well. It's sort of amazing to me, the opening remark about Windows being the most exciting thing coming from Microsoft, because it seems like it's been a long time since anyone
Yes.
made that argument. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, we always think there's exciting things going on with Windows, but this one, it's a different time. And I think the interesting thing about it is that
Mm-hmm.
it seemed like at the beginning of the whole pandemic, this might be relatively short-lived. Like, oh,
Yeah.
work from home is this like short-term thing we have to do. It seems like maybe this is
So,
how
knocking on wood over
really the
here.
new normal. Like, this is just how it's going to be,
Yeah.
right? I don't
Yeah.
know. Interesting.
Yeah, I always sort of, and this isn't like an official rating mechanism, but I always sort of judge the enthusiasm around Windows because there's certainly a bubble, right? There's people like us, there's like the Mary Joes, the Pauls of the world who are always writing about Windows, but when it sort of cracks outside that egg or that bubble, and there's other journalists or websites that typically don't write about Windows or things like that covering it, that's when you know that they're starting to make some further inroads or impressions on different communities, if you will.
For sure. And there's sort of a plurality of
Yes.
topics right now too, which is sort of also this kind of unique point in time. So where shall we begin?
We shall begin with Microsoft. This is a little unusual for Microsoft, I guess, or maybe not, but they officially unveiled Windows 365, and then they wouldn't tell us the pricing, and then they hit the go button, and all of a sudden we can finally figure out the pricing. So the big answer is it depends. Sort of like what you want, what you need. So it ranges anywhere from $20 a month for a very low end device. I think it's hold on, I got the actual things here. So we have, which gets you one virtual CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, and 64 gigs of storage, and jumps all the way up over $160 a month for 32 gigs of RAM with 8 virtual CPU cores and 512 gigs of storage. And that is per month.
Correct. And so we're back to sort of this argument of, why and who really needs it, and at what point do you justify paying that kind of monthly fee when you're going to probably need a PC in order to access that environment anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, again, like we said last episode, for sure there
Mhm.
definitely are. And it's usually when, especially for large global contractors, think of your, Indian and Chinese offshore companies, think of your major North American offshore outsourcers, and they're doing, high sensitivity security work on application development. Almost, saying without exception is going too far. It is well known that many of the, federal government contracts and very large institutions require their contractors to use a hosted desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example of that. And then usually they would be paying for that. And if it's for security reasons, right? FinServ, FinTech, like we talked about, same thing. And so they would be paying for that in order for their contractors to have a secure environment to access. My understanding from both the contractor side as well as the hiring organization side is they hate it. Everybody hates it. It's a pain. It's an administrative pain. User experience is lousy, but it has kind of become this necessary evil because it is, going back to this notion of zero trust, probably the best option, for better or worse. So then where is the right place to put the dial on this slider between the seemingly more affordable $20 a month that we know now is competitive with other DaaS services, right on up to this sort of you're buying a new PC twice a year price. To get anything done, you're probably going to be somewhere at least in the middle of that range. The high end, I don't know how much more you really get. Like, I guess at a local performance level, it would probably seem better given all the latency. I don't know. Where are you at on this argument, Brad?
So a lot of opinions, I guess, and so, a lot of thoughts. Because much like you, I completely understand. First off, Microsoft said, and I'm quoting here some vaguely, they said this is the first PC in the cloud, and I'm like, I don't think that's accurate. You know, you can run with that, but I think Cisco and a few dozen other companies would probably make pretty strong arguments that's not true. Microsoft, you know, big-headedness aside, there's sort of like this overlapping idea here that we're up against this chip shortage right now. This is sort of bleeds into a later question,
Yeah.
of where I know for a fact people who are trying to order Surface hardware in this case from Microsoft, and they're being told, like you can order it, it's going to show up, but we can't tell you when, where, why, or how, or you know, you got to roll with what you got. And in that instance, this type of a solution might make sense. If you're rolling like an older Surface Pro 3 still in your environment, a Pro 4, and you need something just to patch you along until you can truly get new hardware, this might make a lot of sense. And to your point, for contractors overseas and you want the absolute be-all, end-all control, again, this might make sense. For the vast majority of users, I don't know if it does, because I believe Microsoft says that you are still required to have a Windows 10 Pro license on the hardware that is accessing this service, which will quietly raise the floor on the price that you are going to need to pay to access Microsoft 365.
That's a little data point that I didn't know,
Yeah.
Brad, and that's non-trivial.
Right.
So the other thing is, if your argument is true that you're going to make this investment because you can't get hardware faster, it's sort of a lesser of two evils argument, because the user experience is rarely very good,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, even you know, I've got the great luxury of having very amazingly affordable gigabit fiber Ethernet to my house. And it's still not great when you do some of
Yeah.
these remote things. And so there's always a weak link somewhere, even
Mm-hmm.
if you got amazing, blazingly fast speeds. Um, yeah, I feel like the chip shortage is a plausible argument, but it will be a short-term problem. And DAS is sort of a less than awesome workaround, especially if you have
Mm-hmm.
to have the 10 Pro license as a minimum anyway. So yeah, I'm still back to not awesome, still at most a minority of
Yep.
the PC endpoints in the world, and certainly Microsoft's not the first one to offer this, right?
Right.
I mean, they're kind of last to the dance
Yep.
here, although they have the scale and ability to provide a competitive price and feature function that is almost certainly going to eclipse the rest of the competition. So that's in their favor,
Mm-hmm.
kind of mid and long term. Is they'll probably win the race. But we know from, you know, our customers and just friends in the industry that Workspaces is doing just fine.
Yep.
And they have pretty good wide adoption, and things are going fine for them that way. So it's not going to be a one horse race. And you know, and we also know that Amazon has such insane scale that they could just reduce prices arbitrarily
Mm-hmm.
and stay in the race and even kind of get ahead in the race. You know, because how good does it need to be? Well, it only needs to be good enough, mostly for devs to have a high functioning IDE, which is not that huge of a requirement, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not doing CAD, we're not doing, you know, high end graphics work, we're not producing videos over DAS, right? I mean, that's
Yep.
the worst use case for
Yes.
this technology. So yeah, interesting to see where it goes. Interesting to see what that low end SKU really does in terms of performance. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think we're talking about basic office functions at best. You know, maybe I don't know why you would get a remote desktop to do, you know, office things, except, you know, for the security of access
Mm-hmm.
and things like that in some of these environments. So,
I still
I'll leave it
think,
with a big
like, my gut still tells me that this was part of a Department of Defense contract, that this is the environment that was spun up to meet some of those requirements, and then now they're commercializing something that they built for that.
Well, I think you have a strong argument there, because how else would they have the compute capacity to offer this all of a sudden at this kind
Right.
of price point?
Yep.
right? Given that there's a chip shortage that is not new, how is it that they have such tremendous data center capacity to do this? And the thing is, the cloud is not just sort of one way or a single
Hmm.
architecture deployed for all purposes. All of these services often have the back end hardware tailored to optimize for that at every level, to optimize performance for customers, but also to optimize power consumption, throughput, security. So all of this is sort of there's a lot more screw turning on the back end than maybe we give thought to every day. And so to that end, yes, exactly to your point, this is something that has been kind of brewing, and to kind of flip the switch really quick and present it as this packaged product does seem to beg the question that this, may have started life as something else and became this
Hmm.
sort of through a couple right turns, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the reality of it. Anybody who's hung around Microsoft long enough knows how they typically launch, especially enterprise grade products. There's always a preview that lasts months, if not years, sometimes, depending on the scale of the product. And the fact that this just came, they announced it, said here's a quick preview. It's like 2 months, and then we're full scale enterprise ready. Is non-traditional in the land of Redmond for sure.
Yeah, and the Azure Virtual Desktop has been out there for a while
Hmm.
in different forms, right?
Yep.
It started out as a server SKU, like a server-based desktop that you could kind of use as Windows, and then it became kind of Windows client,
Yep.
but was not at all priced competitively in a way that it would be adopted broadly. Um, really, it was sort of started as a thing for partners, if I recall the early
Yeah, I think
history
that
of
sounds
this as
right.
well. It's like many of these things. And so, now it's really this kind of mainstream thing. So what were the twists and turns that got it here? What were the learnings? What was adoption like prior to this, right? Did they have some really large enterprise customers that they, you know, built this into the enterprise agreement in such a way that it was affordable, or that they used that as a validation mechanism, almost
Hmm.
certainly at a product management level? But nevertheless, here we are. It'll be interesting to see where it goes and what the future of this is like. And I would still go on the record with this bet that it is going to remain in this 10 to 20% kind of
Yeah.
adoption level. So, we're looking at in the enterprise anyway, that would land on the order of maybe, in the tens of millions of total desktops globally on a
Hmm.
landscape that's north of a half a billion desktops. So yes, lots. And certainly you put dollars to that, and it's, hundreds of millions knocking on the door of $1 billion, which is the kind of market, that
Hmm.
Microsoft would move into. So I could see that, but it's not going to be meaningful in terms of taking over total market share of PC desktops. I really have a hard time kind of
Yeah,
believing that would be the case.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, Microsoft looks, well, it's funny. They talked about this in their last earnings. Many years ago, it used to be if it wasn't $1 billion business line, Microsoft didn't care about it. Like, that was just kind of the rule. This last earnings call, they kind of bumped that up to talking about $10 billion lines of business. Uh,
Interesting,
and so, not that Windows does fall into that category, but you look
for
at
sure.
the potential for this. I mean, they could get this pretty easily up into $1 billion, but it's not going to have a dent in the overall Windows desktop market. I tend to agree with your sort of viewpoint of this.
Yeah, and the reason to stay in this market might be more defensive than
Yeah.
anything from a market share perspective. Like we need to keep our users using Windows, and we want them to keep consuming Windows through
Yep.
Microsoft services and not through our competitor service, and certainly not our enemies'
Hmm.
services. And so in that regard, yes, for them to, prop this up at a 500 million to $1 billion a year kind of run rate, and maybe people decide that it's worth the investment and they go in more to the mid
Hmm.
end and higher end SKUs, and it turns into, some billions. And then it starts becoming accretive to this total Windows story. And, who knows? It'll be interesting to see. Kind of the next 18 months would be, I think, the right time to kind of start having a retrospective on how it went.
Yeah, we'll find out. We'll find out. It's I don't know. It's out there. People can go sign up. Well, you can sort of sign up. Microsoft said they ran out of capacity, which was an interesting soundbite from them. It's like, we have unlimited cloud, and then it's like, no, not unlimited. But anyways,
Right. Yes. Cloud very limited. That's the other thing to realize. All of these things still rely on actual computers. They're not some wizard behind the curtain that just grants you more CPUs in a world with a chip shortage. So yes,
well,
more of that is our future as well, by the way, right? I mean, more cloud downtime, more cloud capacity shortage, all of that.
So dovetailing nicely into that, I'm curious if you have heard, I mean, you have a different perspective in optics into the sort of enterprise hardware market. Have any of your clients are on that side of the fence? Have you seen anything, on the downside of this chip shortage? I've certainly heard about it from people trying to order Surface hardware. It's pretty well known in the industry. I'm just curious what you've heard from your side of the coin.
Definitely presenting problems to customers. And the larger, kind of more mature organizations are just getting strategic about it, right? They're just accepting and acknowledging and kind of playing that into the forecast and their procurement processes. And so it is not, they're not allowing it to be a crisis because there are computers for sale. And the question is just on what time frame is the requirements that, or on what time frame will our requirements be able to be met by our partners, whether that's a reseller or a direct relationship with an OEM or whatever it might be. And they're kind of prepping for that cadence, right? We're used to buying computers 500 at a time. Now we only buy them 100 at a time or 50 at a time, based on availability, capacity, as well as kind of the supply demand and dynamics of price and the inflationary risk as well, which is also playing into this. So a lower spec is more expensive. Is it worth it to just sort of bide our time a little bit or revisit our spec requirements to be able to keep this in the realm of affordability? Or is it worth buying up right now, right? Are certain specs kind of more preferable to buy, up on processor and memory in the short term because it's all costing more anyway, and kind of settle in for sort of a longer arc, maybe try to get 5 years out of hardware instead of 3 years out of hardware the way you used to. So that's what we're seeing. We're also getting information from our OEM partners that they themselves are having a hard time getting devices for their own internal needs, whether it be demos or testing or benchmarking and things like that. So everyone's feeling it to a certain extent. We are getting indications that there will be an end, right, to this shortage. This isn't a permanent thing. But what happens over whatever it's going to be the next 6 or 9 months, we're going to be in the shortage probably for 3 to 6 months, and then there'll be a tail to it of another 3 to 6 months. So what does that mean for these, wizened IT veterans who are being smart and strategic about this and playing this into it? And then it also raises questions about Windows 11 and how that whole migration process will play out, and timing for that, and buying hardware that satisfies that spec now so that you're kind of migration ready, and not buying kind of down spec to satisfy today's requirement at a price you can afford, and then having to buy again for your Windows 11 migration. That's another extremely important consideration for these customers, right? And for our listeners, right? That's another very, if you're a young IT person, and you're in charge of desktops, and you're listening to this because, I get concerned about Windows and PCs. This is a time to say, okay, we have to buy more PCs. Great. Spend up, or decisively spend way down, knowing you're going to replace again in a year or whatever it might be, 18 months. But this all needs to be factored into this whole game that we play around Windows PCs in the enterprise, right?
Yeah, and that I'd like to think you're doing this intentionally, Aaron, but this lines up perfectly that Microsoft still has not officially confirmed what the basement floor is going to be for Windows 11. We're still up in the air about if it's the 7th gen processors are going to be able to do it. The TPM 2.0, I suspect, will stick because that's even older than 7th gen, but the 7th gen processor, we still don't quite know the whole story yet. And so we're just gotta twiddle your thumbs for a little bit, I guess.
Well, in this sort of on again, off again with the tool, right? They made this like, am I compatible tool?
Yep.
And then they took it offline and for reasons. And so
Reasons.
now how do we determine exactly what this is?
Yeah.
You know, the positive side of this is it appears that the test and dev builds are coming out on a pretty strong cadence,
Hmm.
and the deltas between each of those is very similar to what we've seen in generations gone by, where it's like, oh, okay, this feature disappeared and now this feature's back, and here's this, and it looks like the old way, at least for now. So there's some pretty interesting fluidity, it appears, between these builds. I haven't done a lot of touching on it myself, but based on what's being reflected by people who are touching it in the media and internally in our organization, it's interesting and seems normal, I guess, is what I would say. So I'm not overly concerned about this whole open question on the spec. I think that will get settled in enough time, and I don't know of many organizations that are just dying to migrate to Windows 11.
Right.
Right? I mean, Windows 10 is fine. It's
Hmm.
working well, and you know, people are grousing about Alt Tab not working with this latest patch. You know, we didn't have that problem per se.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean it doesn't exist and that it isn't a nuisance, because it is one of these, like, you know, 100-mile-an-hour productive Windows user things that we all use. So it could be disruptive, but if that's the biggest problem we have, it's a good day. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Like, if they tamp down the 0 days and we got an Alt Tab hang up that we gets resolved with a hot fix in a couple of weeks or something, great, right? I mean, I think we got to keep all of this in perspective with the world that we're living in and the
Yeah.
security problems and the
Yes.
frequency of hacks and ransomware and yada yada yada, right? All the things, all the topics we keep talking about. So I think overall landscape is healthy, right, from a Windows perspective, and that we're living in a world that seems overall normal to bordering on what I would consider to be pretty good, as far as like this last
Hmm.
couple months of announcements and what we know about updates and patches, and you know, on and on. I think that it's in a above average kind of posture at the moment.
And speaking of sort of running Windows for the long term here, I had to sit through Microsoft had some like Q&A stuff, and it was like 2.5 hours long, and I'm sitting there pounding on the keyboard like LTSC, LTSC, LTSC. And they finally acknowledged that LTSC will come to Windows 11. The version of Windows 10 that I believe is coming out this fall will be the next iteration of LTSC. So LTSC Windows 11 will exist, but we won't get a build for a couple years more than likely. So
So this AMA you sat through. You're telling
mhm,
me you sat through the whole thing.
I I I did.
Congratulations, first of
Yes,
all,
thank
for
you.
making it. And so for listeners, this wasn't a Reddit thing, right? I
No, it was
mean,
on their own
Reddit
thing.
sort of
Yeah.
designed and invented the AMA.
Yes.
But this was just like a video thing,
Yep.
right? And so off they went, and it was fine. And this is where this revelation about LTSC for Windows 11
Hmm.
came. Is that right?
Yep.
Awesome. Great news for so many people we know, and
Hmm.
friends of the company, and just, you know, independent software vendors globally. This is a very positive development. Um, the fact that it's not going to be available for a couple of years shouldn't be a problem,
Right.
right?
I agree.
Otherwise, why would it be long term if if you were going to have it available on the day of and update it again soon? I think that's not going to be a problem for most of these organizations, because the people who are LTSC as a necessity are the people who are bound to other devices, who are using Windows often to support other dependent hardware environments.
Yep.
And that's why it can be so disruptive. And that's why you want so little change. There are other scenarios where you want to do LTSC. There are enterprise, just desktop environments where they prefer this for all their reasons as well. Um, you know, be it LOB apps or whatever they've
Hmm.
got going on, legacy environments they have to support. Totally understand it. Same logic, I think, still applies there, where you don't want it to change for a while if you can avoid it. But to the migration discussion of moments ago, if you are planning your migration, it'd be good to know a date. It'd be good to know you
Yeah,
can
I
get
agree with that.
there right before too long. And I wonder too if they were setting conservative expectations, because these are the most conservative IT organizations who are going to be pounding their fists for this news, and they're the most vocal, who are going to
Hmm.
cause the most problems if Microsoft doesn't deliver on this time frame, right? Here
Yeah.
they go again, right? Making promises they can't stand behind. Setting a nice conservative expectation, coming out with it, whatever, a year post RTM or GA of Windows 11 will surprise and delight everybody, right? And then
Yeah.
and then it's a halo over Microsoft's head, and it's all these happy, OEMs and ISVs and IHVs and on and on and on. So I think another generally positive development overall, but for your tired mousing digits and the tedium of a 2.5 hour FAQ on video.
It's important. It was important to me. I mean, it was one of those things. It's like they have to acknowledge that this channel, or they used to call them channels, right? Yeah, LTSC used to be
Yes.
branch channels, whatever they're calling the tree this week. Like they had to acknowledge it at some point, and finally, there's like, yeah, it's going to happen, and then it was like, all right, thank you, that's all we needed. Catch you later. You could have done this 2 hours ago, and that would have been great. But now we got the answer we need.
You sat through it for us all, and now we're enlightened as a result. And your piece is really good too. I think listeners would benefit from reading the Petri.com piece on the LTSC revelation from that. So all the merrier.
Always appreciate the plug, and always appreciate you coming to hang out, Aaron. This has been another, honestly, pretty good episode. I like to pat myself on the back, but I feel like this one was a pretty good one. And to everybody else, there'll be good, important links down in the description below, including a webinar coming up with Smart Deploy. You should check that out, and we'll catch all of you right back here next time.